Hi, my name is Charles Post, Executive Vice President here at Simplify, leading our contract analytics practice. I'm here joined by my colleague Charles from Relativity Contracts, and we're going to be talking through how Relativity Contracts is kind of the next revolution of contract analytics, which is already a part of the ecosystem of Relativity. Relativity Contracts is part of our larger CI contract service offering at Simplify. So I'm going to pass it off here to Charles. Don't get confused, I'm Charlie, he's Charles for the purposes of this demonstration, and we are happy to show you a little bit about what Relativity Contract is doing as part of the CI contract suite.
Thanks, Charles. Awesome, so we're going to start today by looking at the end results first. This is kind of what your contracts data is going to look like after you've utilized Relativity Contracts. So if I scroll down here, on the bottom half of my screen, you can see a list. Each row in this list represents an individual agreement, and each column contains an important piece of data that we care about. Things like contract effective date, the contract type, governing law, and more. And so everything I'm going to be showing today is going to map back to this end goal of having structured contract data that we can use to understand the risks in our contracts and make business decisions going forward. And one of the ways Relativity Contracts helps you do that is through a pre-built model called classification. And I'm going to show you the results of that classification model here next. Contract classification scans through your agreements, pulling out the contract title, and then also tagging each of your agreements with a specific contract type. If I scroll down again here in my list, you can see we're identifying this first agreement as a lease. Now, this is just one of the pre-built models we utilize. We also have a pre-built model called segmentation analysis. Segmentation analysis goes through your verbatim contracts, pulling out specific sections from those contracts. It's tagging each section with a specific section type and also saving the coordinates of that section. Once we have those coordinates saved, we actually are creating a new relativity document for each section contained in the larger agreement. And the reason we do that is so you can now do smart things in relativity, like run mass actions across all of your confidentiality agreement sections, or run saved searches. I also like to use our compare tool at the section or clause level as well. Let's take the example of representing a company that's going through the process of purchasing a startup. As part of that acquisition process, we want to go through HR employment agreements and review the confidentiality agreements in those contracts to make sure that they meet our gold standard. So what I'm going to be doing here is filtering specifically for the confidentiality sections within those HR agreements. And now I'm going to be running a compare mass action on those sections.
I just want to stop you for a minute, just take a step back.
Yeah.
So what are we solving for in a few clicks? The irony is that companies spend millions of dollars every year negotiating contracts and then not know what's in them. And what we're doing is, and they're stuck in these flat files, it's a data problem. So how do we leverage what we already have, relativity, how do we leverage that skill set that most organizations already have, and how do we surface that information? How would we be doing this differently? This would be a group of documents going out to a law firm or to a group of contractors to review. They wouldn't be putting together fancy diagrams or spreadsheets, and they'd be putting together email spreadsheets just to compare the different clauses. It's not consistent, they go to sleep, they have to eat, they take bathroom breaks, and this doesn't. What this does is help you get to your answers quickly. Is it perfect? No, and that's the expectation, it's not perfect. But the idea is an accelerator, leveraging technology you already have, just making it more pervasive in terms of how it's going to be leveraged by your organization. Getting more value out of your existing technologies, but also getting more value out of your assets, your data assets, your contract assets. So how do we unlock that value? How do we unlock? This is a pre-due diligence M&A. This would be with a law firm, and they'd be going through with associates, and those associates would be arguing over, like they were in front of the Supreme Court of Partners, of what an interpretation of a provision was. And what we're doing is we're cutting through that noise by a click of a button. Again, pre-built, but agile and flexible to tackle other use cases and other areas outside of confidentiality. What if it were non-competes, which is in the news lately for the FTC? Or pricing or payment terms. How do we get to answers quickly? And that's what Charles is showing you here right now, is that what he's done in within about a minute is hundreds of hours of work in just collection and due diligence and explanation. And so that's really the value, that acceleration that you heard, you're seeing on the screen.
Great. So the next thing we're going to be doing here is pasting in our gold standard confidentiality clause to use as the base document to compare the existing agreements against. So I've got my gold standard confidentiality clause here saved. I'm just going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it in here. Excuse me. And I'm going to go ahead and make this my base document. Now along the right-hand side here, we're calculating similarity scores on a scale from 0 to 10, where 10 would be an exact match. So we can see these agreements are fairly similar. They're coming in at 5.9, 5.7, and we can see they're fairly similar, but there are some significant differences compared to the golden base document that I've just pasted in. So let's go and actually open up these contracts and see what those differences are. So now on the left-hand side of my screen, you have that clean, golden confidentiality clause. Excuse me. And on the right-hand side, we have the marked up version, where the green is indicating additions and the red is indicating what's not present. And as we scan through these documents, what we're going to find here is that the contracts for the startup that I'm acquiring map up to my gold standard pretty closely, but they're all missing the assignment of rights to IP clause at the end here. So now this becomes a pretty actionable item. I can do things like tag these documents for repapering to have that clause added. I can also export this document to Microsoft Word, where the differences will be maintained as track changes, or export to Microsoft Excel, where we can include other fields and other data in the spreadsheet, along with the differences between the two clauses.
I just want to point out here, this might be a pre-due diligence M&A, but what if I was in in-flight negotiation and I just want to see the comparison of my docs? In-flight, my gold standards, right, or my playbook, or my prevailing terms that I want, versus how does it compare? And assignment gets confused quite often in a contract, especially for assignment of IP rights, just on a digression note, but the ability to show very quickly and surface these elements is a huge time savings. But it's so fast that it can be used in in-flight agreements.
Now, a lot of folks are using the compare feature at the clause level because there's less noise, but you can also use the compare feature to compare entire agreements, which can be very useful for scenarios where you're maybe trying to identify the different templates that your organization has been using or has floating around. We like to call this problem template proliferation. And so if I go back to there it is. If I go back to my end result here, and if we're looking at the list of contracts here, I might use the compare tool to identify that contracts 1 through 20 in this list that's loading all belong to the same template. Now I can go into the system and start mass tagging those documents, saving me a ton of time. I know they're all stemming from the same template, and so I can go in and make the same coding decisions on those agreements in one shot.
Okay. But what we're also seeing is that the ability to assign and batch for review, I wouldn't rely on anything from a system out of the gate and be like, all right, it's good, let's go to the deal. We have the ability to curate it with people on a robust statistical or representative sampling basis is really important, and leveraging teams. But having to review everything with 2 eyeballs, now I could do it at scale, with fewer people, with more technology, and a faster pace. So all of this equals to a better outcome and a more informed decision maker, that it's consistent, it's scalable, right? There aren't warehouses of people looking at this. What we're having is a single engine looking at things consistently, apples to apples, especially with the classification, being able to build that Dewey Decimal System, that library of how agreements are organized at organizations, from the SharePoint sites, shared drives, and 72 other places, not microfiche, thank God, that these things can exist, and being able to serve it up in a nice, clean way really helps us get answers to questions. And also, we can, like Google Maps, we can see what's around it. What's around this? What else can we learn from it, not just what's in front of us? And that's a big part of the value add here, is that it gives you additional intelligence on top of it. Awesome. Now that it's loaded.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and actually talk about our contract viewer next. I'm going to open up the first agreement in our list here. We've got a purpose-built viewer for Relativity Contracts. The first thing I'm going to highlight here is our table of contents in the upper left-hand corner. Now this is the result of that segmentation analysis that we talked about earlier. So you can see here in this contract, I'm identifying all the different sections contained in it. Right, we know that contracts can often be very dense, be hundreds of pages of long, and so having this table of contents is going to allow us to navigate through them quickly. Let's say, for example, that I'm interested in something related to liens. I want to know, what does this contract say about liens? I can simply come to my table of contents, select the liens section here. Relativity is going to refresh to show me that specific section. Now coming down this left-hand pane, I also have a data points tab. Relativity Contracts ships with 16 default data points that we're set up to collect and identify automatically. So we have, for example, dates. We're going to identify dates in various formats, and if I expand out this bar just a little bit, you'll see not only are we identifying the different dates in this contract, but also the section in which those dates occurred for added context. Now, you'll have the ability to create your own models to parse additional data points, which you should expect to do, as the data points that you're interested in are going to vary from contract to review to contract review.
Yeah. As part of CI Contract Suite, we've added in hundreds of new models on top of the 16 that come with Relativity, so that you're starting out a little bit ahead, but those things can be tuned to the idiosyncrasies of any organization, because all organizations are unique. And our ability to accelerate that time to value is extremely important. One other thing I want to note here, similar to threading in emails, contracts have to be grouped into families, and being able to extract critical data points like dates, agreement types, and parties help put the document puzzle together. So I'm not looking at what the term used to be, I want to know what it is today. And the ability to group things quickly, this is a big gap in the market because no one's really solving for family mapping outside of Relativity because of the ability to do it within the environment. So the ability to quickly couple documents into families and know what's missing. You have Amendment 1 and Amendment 3, Amendment 2 is important too, maybe, unless it's a Scrivener's error. And what we're seeing here is the ability to go through and tackle issues in a single familiar ecosystem that most companies already own. You don't have to buy a new thing to go do this. And the ability to also understand static data like client names and tying that to reference data. Why? Because this Eventbrite was bought 4 more times. But believe it or not, the contract doesn't change automatically like in Harry Potter. It has to evolve over time, but tying it to client reference data is going to be another critical aspect of how we create better informed decisions for our clients.
So the first example I have for us is just a basic keyword searching. Let's say we need to code something related to subletting. You're simply going to type subletting into your search bar here. You'll see the hits populate below our search bar. We're giving you some additional context before and after the hit, and also identifying for you the section in which that hit occurred. These hits are also interactive, so if you see something that looks pertinent to what you're evaluating or reviewing for, you can select it from the list, and the viewer updates to show you exactly where that hit occurred in the document.
Charles mentioned earlier mass tagging. It's really important because it's also important for normalization. Not everybody wants to see paragraphs of text in an Excel. What they want to see is yes, no's, values, dates, binary information so that they can make quick decisions. And they also want to be able to serve that information up into other dashboards outside of Relativity. So the ability to make this more pervasive in organizations and take, is there subletting, yes or no, plus the supporting text, is all capable within a single ecosystem.
You can also build more advanced models to parse additional data points using some of the pre-built building blocks that we have in Relativity's contract application. I'm going to show you one of those now. Let's say we want to get an understanding of the governing law for this contract. I'm going to use some of the pre-built models that we have that specifically look for governing law phrases, followed by white space, followed by states. So now you can see right away, California is being identified here as the governing law for this contract. There, you can zoom in.
Yeah, good zoom.
Awesome. All right, now, once we have this model built, we're going to be also able to preview the results of how this model performs on other contracts in our data set. And so to do that, I'm going to select the Preview Results button here. Now I could preview this on all the agreements, but for our specific use case, we're interested in the employment agreements. So I'm going to limit my search to just those employment agreements. And as this runs, what we're going to see is some high-level statistics followed by some details on the specific documents or agreements themselves. So you can see up at the top there, we're getting 14 documents with hits, and we're seeing 2 that don't have hits. If we scan through this list, we can see the governing law for the majority of these agreements is Michigan, and we have 1 with Delaware. Now I might want to dig into why I'm not getting hits on 2 of my agreements, so I can quickly filter this list down to those 2 agreements, start digging into them to understand why my model isn't hitting on those agreements, tweak it, make changes so then it's more all-encompassing in the future.
And taking employment agreements, it's the same use case, unless it's towards entertainment. Talent agreements are a form of employment contract. And how do they track how many purple M&Ms need to be in Mariah Carey's trailer? Well, it's on a spreadsheet on someone's desk that they have to remember. Here, the ability to surface that information, again, not specifically in this demonstration, but you get the picture, of surfacing the information and being able to track all the idiosyncrasies of different types of compensation and different needs of, again, this is just one branch of employment. Now take it to an executive branch to specialized talent. So you're taking one use case and you're repurposing it. You don't have to retrain, you don't have to teach people. What you're doing is you're informing the technology, and believe it or not, the technology remembers a lot better than people. And so the ability to leverage this across different use cases, across different areas, to be able to tackle document extraction and obligation management, which is really like, how do I manage what's in my agreements that are not standard, is really the bread and butter of what this technology does, especially amongst the suite of CI contracts with Simplify.
Great. Now, the last thing I wanted to show was actually how easy it is to manually code data when you're reviewing these contracts in Relativity. So I'm going to start by coming over here to my coding layout on the right-hand side, and we're just going to clear out some of the information that's already here. So I'm clearing out the contract title, the client entity, counterparty, and we're going to go through the manual process of coding that information. And we've put a lot of thought into this manual review process to make it as fast and efficient as possible. So starting with contract title, I'm simply highlighting that contract title in my viewer, selecting the send to field option, and then clicking the field that I want to send that information to. Let me try that again. Perfect.
There you go.
Populated there. Let's do client entity next. That's University of the Pacific. So we'll populate that there. And then next up is counterparty, Eventbrite. So I'll highlight that data, select send to field, and then simply click on the field I want to send it to. So I'm able to code several fields in a matter of just a few seconds. You might also be wondering, hey, if I'm having reviewers in the field, in the system, reviewing this data, making these coding decisions manually, can I train a custom model on these send to field examples? And the answer to that question is yes. So you can actually build your own models based on these examples to automatically code contracts or agreements in the future.
Right. To add to that, just the review process. If you did this in Excel and you had multiple screens open, you had one screen with the document, one with the instructions of how to review the document, and one where you had to copy and paste the language from the document, which is 99% of companies today, frankly, it would take between 1 and 2 minutes. This approach is between 8 and 20 seconds per field. Just to give you a sense of just the time to review manually, if you wanted to do this all manually, without any of the bells and whistles. So the acceleration, just on the people part, the human in the loop, is really like a superhuman in the loop. Why? Because their ability to tackle vast quantities. And the reviews, what you're seeing is what we call a vertical review. Everyone's an expert of every field. Well, I don't think everybody's an expert of every field, especially with complex contracts. You could set this up in a way for these review panels to have one person expert in this field and one person expert in this field. And now they're blowing through the review. That's called a horizontal review by field. And what that does is it accelerates the questions to answers. If you think in terms of an assembly line, it's a bit of a Kanban. You have a standard assembly line, and then experts who are more, sound in and more fluent in the more complex components. Again, name, date, effective date. When you get down to, tell me what kind of consent you need for assignment, or tell me what the interest rate is based upon the fallbacks, those are more complex, where you can have specialized people to do that review. So your ability to further commoditize and control and dial into your review process is even more powerful leveraging this tool versus the traditional approach.
Great. And that's everything I had queued up to show today. I hope you're leaving with a couple of things, an understanding of how Relativity Contracts can streamline your workflow using purpose-built viewers, models, and integrated AI throughout.
Yes. Thank you. Really appreciate it. I'm looking forward, as excited as we are that you get about evangelizing your organization with Relativity Contracts and CI contracts.